Hello and welcome. I'm David Levi, director of the Bolch Judicial Institute at Duke Law School. Today we begin the Raphael Lemkin Rule of Law Guardian series that honors individuals who have helped to protect and advance the rule of law. This series is named for Raphael Lemkin, one of the leading scholars of human rights law of the 20th century. Lemkin fled Europe during World War II and joined the Duke Law faculty. He became an eminent scholar of war crimes and genocide and secured passage of the Genocide Convention at the United Nations. What an honor to award the first Lemkin Medal to Benjamin Ferencz, Benjamin B. Ferencz, a rule of law guardian and advocate for so many of his 100 years. He was one of the principal Nuremberg trial lawyers for the United States, working under Chief Prosecutors Justice Robert Jackson and Telford Taylor, and one of the most respected voices in the field of international criminal justice. As a young lawyer at Nuremberg, he led the prosecution of 22 Nazi war criminals. He visited concentration camps, gathered evidence of the Nazi campaign to commit genocide, and succeeded in securing convictions of all 22 defendants in his case. Thereafter, Mr. Ferencz dedicated his life to building a framework of international justice for deterrence, prevention, and accountability for mass atrocities. It is fitting that Mr. Ferencz is our first Raphael Lemkin guardian, for he knew Lemkin and relied on Lemkin's work on genocide during the Nuremberg trial. Benjamin Ferencz has a remarkable story to tell, and to help him tell it, we are so fortunate to have our graduate, Dean Michael P. Scharf. He's a 1988 graduate of Duke Law, the co-dean of Case Western Reserve Law School, and managing director of the Public International Law and Policy Group. Dean Scharf has had his own very distinguished career in the field of international human rights, and he will be our moderator here today. I'm going to turn things over to Dean Scharf, who's going to lead our discussion. But before I do that, I invite the members of our audience to submit questions for Mr. Ferencz using the Q&A button, and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can toward the end of our program. We are also recording here today, and we will post the interview later on our website. Welcome back to Duke Law School, Dean Scharf, and Mr. Ferencz, a warm welcome to you as well, and thank you so much for being here. Dean Scharf.
Thank you, Dean Levy. It is wonderful to have been invited to this very special interview, and it is a pleasure to have the opportunity to once again participate in a colloquy with my dear friend, Ben Ferencz. It's a friendship that goes back 30 years, since he was a young kid of 70. Ben, let's start out with the first question. You were an immigrant from Transylvania who grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. How did you end up at Harvard Law School?
Well, I want to first thank the dean and then thank all the others involved in getting me here to celebrate, recall Raphael Lemkin. My trip to Harvard Law School was very simple. I went from Transylvania, which no longer existed. My sister was born in the same bed I was a year and a half earlier. She's a Hungarian. I was a Romanian. And I realized it didn't make any difference for you what your language was, but how you treated the people. And both of them were anti-Semitic. So I informed my parents, I was 9 months old, we better get out of town. And how about putting me into the Harvard Law School? Well, that's sort of a shortcut, but we landed in Hell's Kitchen, past the Statue of Liberty. We were very poor, so we fled the country. None of my parents had gone to college or something resembling it. But my 8th grade teacher called my mother and said, "This is a gifted boy." And my mother and I both looked at each other. We never got any gifts. I didn't know what she was talking about. Neither did my mother. He said he should go to college. College. We didn't know anybody who went to college. And, so my mother said, well, whatever you say is good for him, we'll do that for him. And she said, but we have no money. Well, we'll get you into a special high school, Townsend Harris High, the only one of its kind in the country. It's on a college curriculum. And if he passes the course there, he'll automatically be admitted to City College. And so since it didn't cost anything, we were able to afford it. And off I went to Townsend Harris High School, for boys only, of course. And from there, I went to City College. And since I was very short, which some of you may have noticed, I knew I had to be better in something because people were always picking on me. And so I thought I got to go to the best law school. And I inquired, and I discovered that Brooklyn was not really the best law school, and Harvard was. So I sent an application to Harvard, and much to surprise, they said, you're in. They gave me my first exam in criminal law. I knew a lot of criminals. I didn't know anything else. And based on that, they gave me a full scholarship. So there I was in the Harvard Law School with a full scholarship. But I had to.
The story, Ben, of immigrants from all over who came here and were self-made and worked harder than anybody else and went farther. Well, I want to know how you got from Harvard Law School, as good as it is, to being the youngest prosecutor at Nuremberg and the chief prosecutor of the biggest World War II war crimes trial in history, the Einsatzgruppen trial.
Well, you skipped a minor point. There was a thing called World War II that broke out when I was in my third year at law school. And I went down with all the other students in the Harvard Square to volunteer. Without going into further details in it, the Air Force, where I wanted to go, said you couldn't reach the pedals, so they wouldn't accept me. I said, how about a navigator? And they tested me, and they said, if we told you to bomb Berlin, you'd probably end up in Tokyo. So I was not qualified for everything I wanted to get in. The Marines said, you don't look like a Marine. And anyway, to shorten the war, I landed on the beaches of Normandy. I was a buck private in the 115th AAA Gun Battalion. I got 5 battle stars when the war was over for not having been killed in any of the major battles of the war, beginning with Normandy Beach, going through the Maginot Line, going through the Siegfried Line. I crossed the Rhine River, driving a little Jeep that I was driving myself. And I was there for the final battle of the Bulge, where we fought that too. So I had these 5 battle stars for not having been killed, which was very interesting. But the end of my war crimes experience, which you seem to have omitted here, but I'm going to bring it in anyway. While I was at Harvard, I had to earn a living. I was hired by Professor Sheldon Gluck, who was doing a book on war crimes, and I was doing the research for him. So when we got into the Army, they of course recognized this great talent, a great graduate of the Harvard Law School, an expert on war crimes, so they put me in the artillery, where I knew nothing. And supposed to be a typist in the artillery, I didn't know how to type either. However, in due course, the Army had been told to set up war crimes trials. And this was when the Justice Jackson International Military Tribunal was already on. Justice Jackson was the American representative, and the 4 occupying powers, France, Russia, the Soviet Union, were the other components. And they laid down various principles. I was still in the Army while the trial there started. And when it was over, I had gotten this honorable discharge as a sergeant of infantry. And the Army wanted me to go back. And I said, we go back into the army? I said, in order to get me back in the army, you have to declare war on Germany again and be losing. So I said, we'll give you a simulated rank. I said, what does that mean? I said, well, you won't have to be in the army, or we'll give you a simulated rank. You'll have the rank of a full colonel. And I said, how long do I have to stay? They said, well, we'll leave it up to you. Anytime you want to quit, you can quit. Ha-ha, that was my chance. I went out, I was in the Pentagon. I called my girlfriend who had been patiently waiting, another Hungarian girl, immigrant girl, while I went off to law school and so on. And I said, how would you like to go to Europe for a brief honeymoon? And she said, I'd love it. I said, you got it. And so that was my proposal, the first proposal I made, because I said I wouldn't get married until I could support a family. So there I was. And the war was over. And I came home with 10 million other GIs looking for a job. And the fact that I had experience in the Army as a war crimes investigator, I'm quite sure I was the first war crimes investigator in headquarters, General Patton. And I entered the camps with the troops getting in there because you had to move very quickly. Otherwise the evidence was destroyed. And I saw the horrors, dead bodies lying all on the ground. You couldn't tell if they were dead or alive. Eyes crying out for help. Bones stacked up in front of the crematorium like cordwood, waiting to be burned. The SS fleeing, disease everywhere, rats and humans groveling in the piles of garbage looking for some bite to eat. So I don't blame you for skipping the gruesome parts, but they haven't left me yet. And
well, Ben, what I found particularly interesting for this audience, which includes law students, is the fact that your research assistantship for Professor Brooke was part of what paved your way for this incredible adventure. Let me fast forward you for a minute to talk about that trial that you were the chief prosecutor of, the Einsatzgruppen trial. What was the importance of that trial? What can you tell us about that?
First important, you have to learn how to pronounce it.
Yes, I know.
Einsatzgruppen, which is the German word. Einsatz is action, and group is a group. Because I had the war crimes experience, I was, I think, the first man in the United States Army to investigate war crimes. The Justice Jackson trial went on when I left the Army, and the United States had decided to have some subsequent proceedings, they called it, to the International Military Tribunal, in order to explain to the public how it was that a civilized country like Germany could tolerate all these horrors which were being revealed. And the United States decided they were going to set up their own trials. The French and the British, they wanted to go their own way, and they did. And one day in the artillery, somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, you have to report to General Patton's headquarters. I went there and met the judge advocate, and he said, we've been instructed to set up a war crimes branch. What's a war crime? I explained, that's the truth. They knew about conduct unbecoming a gentleman. They knew about desertion. They never heard of war crimes. I said, sit down, I'll explain it to you. Because of my research at Harvard, I was an expert also on war crimes. And I was the first man in the US Army to do war crimes work. The first times of reports we got in were Allied flyer cases. Allied flyers, British and American, were flying over German-held territory. They were shot down or crashed, and they were almost invariably lynched by the German mob on the ground. They were beaten to death. And so these were the first types of cases we had. About almost the same time, we got reports into headquarters that it looked like people coming out of work camp. They looked like they're all starving. And okay, Ben, get in your Jeep, and off I went. And the first camp I got to was a fall camp of Buchenwald. And there the scene was, as I've touched on briefly, incredible, incredible. The human mind cannot grasp it. Dead bodies piled up and all that. People just dead, more dead than alive. The crematoria going with everything in it. Well, I withdrew my investigating, which meant, first of all, seizing all the documents. I didn't have any insignia on my uniform. I refused to put any insignia. I couldn't do the job as a private or as a corporal or even as a sergeant. So I pretended I was a personal representative of General Patton. I would come into the camp with my Jeep, written on the front of it, MRI, always alone, get out of my way. I go to the commanding officer and I say, I'm here on orders of General Patton, carrying out a policy of the United States President. I need 10 men immediately, surround the stripes trooper of the office. Nobody goes in or out without my permission. If they hesitated to ask, I'd say, now, move it. And so they'd immediately surround the office, which was always manned by inmates themselves. So I'd come into the office, talk to the inmates, and some interesting stories there, and seize the records of whatever they had. The Germans were very methodical. They kept exact records of everything they did. If they killed somebody, they said so. And so we had daily reports being sent top secret to Berlin, where they were consolidated from the different Einsatzgruppen, the special squads, whose assignment it was to kill without pity or remorse every single Jewish man, woman, and child. That was their assignment. Special action groups, Einsatzgruppen A, B, C, and D. And when the war was over, really, and the United States had decided to put on additional trials, I got a telegram from the Pentagon, dear sir, in 3 years they never called me sir. They'd like me to go back into the army. I said, what for? I said, well, we have these additional trials coming up, and you've got the experience, you've got the Harvard background and criminal law and all that, and we need you. I said, all these years you didn't need me. They gave me every filthy job they could. Oh, you're a Harvard man, do the toilet over again, clean it again. I got that every day, that type of abuse. And anyway, I had agreed then to go back and for a honeymoon. Well, before I had left the Pentagon, I was referred to General, then Colonel Telford Taylor, and he interviewed me. He said, I've been ordered by the president to set up these subsequent proceedings. And he said, I've been checking up on your record. And he said, but I'm concerned because you're occasionally insubordinate. And I said, no, that's not correct. I'm not occasionally insubordinate. I'm usually insubordinate. I never obey an order, which I know is stupid or illegal. I said, well, I've been checking up on you too. He was also a Harvard lawyer. And I said, I don't think he'll give me that kind of order. He said, you know, you go with me. And so he hired me to go back to Germany. I intended to go only for a honeymoon. When we got to settling what I'm supposed to do there, he said, look, man, we're going to have additional trials and we need the evidence. We have a suspect in custody. We have no evidence. You've got nothing. And if you have the evidence and you don't have the custody, we don't have to chase them. You've got nothing either. So your job is to go and collect the evidence, which would convict the people we already have in custody. And I divided that up into military people, SS people, industrialists who were working people to death, doctors who were performing medical experiments. And I put together quickly a staff of about 50 people, went to Berlin headquarters, where we set up headquarters, because that's where the Nazi center was. And one day, one of my researchers comes in and he hands me a whole batch of papers, and he says, look what I got. And I open it up and look at it, sort of loose leaf binders. Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR. I'm showing off with my German. It's situation reports from the Soviet Union. These were special units, had been created for the job they had, and that was to kill all the Jews, men, women, and children. And every day they reported how many they killed and where it was. And I took a little adding machine and I began adding them up. When I reached 1 million killed, 1 million, I took a sampling. I got on the next plane down to Nuremberg, met with Telford Taylor, who was in a general. I said, we got to put on a new trial. He said, you can't, because the Pentagon has already approved the trial. All the lawyers have been assigned. They're all busy working. We're never going to get approval for a new trial. Well, I said, time to let these guys go. I have in my hand, 1 million cold-blooded murders. You're not going to let these bastards go. He said, well, can you do it in addition to your other function? I said, sure. He said, okay, you do it.
Hey, Ben, how old were you at that time?
I was then 27 years old. I'd never been in a courtroom.
So sometime right before that trial began, you met Raphael Lemkin, whose prize you are given today.
I know. I met Raphael Lemkin a bit later. I met him. My trial was over. I was still there doing work, and Lemkin was. I was executive counsel to Telford Taylor after my Einsatzgruppen trial. It was in that capacity that Lemkin came to me. He was connected with some Polish group, but he didn't have any status, and he didn't have any house either. They were lodging. So I arranged for him to be put in army billets, and he gave me a copy of his book, Axis Rule in Occupied Territories. And we got to know each other. And I recognized him to be a serious, sad fellow. His whole family had been murdered. And Einsatzgruppen, they didn't enlist them then, but if they crossed the Einsatzgruppen path, they were killed. And so I got to know him. And as a result, when I was appointed the chief prosecutor of this biggest murder trial in history, the murdering million people, I quoted Raphael Lemkin in, I think, a second or third paragraph. I used the term genocide.
So Lemkin coined that phrase.
Yes, he did.
And you were, I think, the first ever prosecutor to utter it in a court of law.
That's correct. And I did that because I was sorry for him. He had a sad story to tell, a really sad story. He was sort of bedraggled, and but a very determined man. And we remained friends for many years after that as well. But I thought, in tribute to him, I'm going to call it what it is, genocide. And so in second or third paragraph of my opening statement, which began and said, "It is with sorrow and with hope that we here disclose the deliberate slaughter of more than 1 million innocent and defenseless men, women, and children. The sorrow was for the victims. The hope was for the future." So I cast my goals in the opening sentence of the Einsatzgruppen trial. And I was 27 years old. That was about 75 years ago, more than that. The opening was in September 1947. And most of you were not born yet. And
as Dean Levy pointed out in your introduction, it was the biggest murder trial in history, and you convicted everybody. Is that right?
Yes. Well, first, who do you select? It's a very important question. The Einsatzgruppen consisted of 4 different segments, about 3,000 men. I had 22 defendants because I was limited to the number of people who were tried by the International Military Tribunal. In other words, if you didn't have a seat in the courtroom, you were free. It was the most ridiculous thing. But I was limited. I said, now how am I going to bring justice? You got 22 defendants, I got 1 million people murdered. You cannot balance the scales of justice with these. No matter you chop them up into 1 million pieces and fed them to the dogs, you wouldn't balance the scale. So I said, well, if I could have this trial mean something, it would have to be more than just executing these select few. And they had murdered the people because they didn't share the race or the religion or the ideology of their executioners. And if I could limit the trial to saying, look, what happened here was a crime against humanity. It was genocide. If we have meaning to this trial, you must be able to assure the right of all human beings to live in peace and dignity, regardless of their race or creed or religion or color. And that's what I asked for. The case represented a plea of humanity to law. So my emphasis was on that, and I got that judgment. All of the defendants were convicted. 13 of them were sentenced to death. 4 of them were actually executed. It's another story if you want to go into it. So it was a historic trial from every point of view. I rested my case in 2 days. 2 days! All the prosecutors who do the international court, I say, eat your heart out. In 2 days. I didn't want to talk to any of the defendants. And I made it a specific point. I had their daily reports signed on the bottom. I'm a Reichssache, secret matter, top secret thing. Sent their report to Berlin. Berlin, they were consolidated and they distributed them to all levels of the Nazi hierarchy. And I had a distribution list, 99 people who later said they never heard of it. Baloney, they never heard of it. I got them here. And the same with the defendants. I don't want to talk to them. I had investigators. I told my investigators, they went to interview all the defendants. I said, I want to know everything about them. The day we're born till the day we're going to hang them. But I'm not going to talk to them because I'm going to have this document here. Top secret, top secret. Your name is SS General so-and-so. You said you killed 90,000 Jews. What have you got to say? Is that your name? Yeah, okay, it's my name. Explain that. So I just made short shrift of them, really.
Well, Ben, history records that you did convict them on the strength of their own records. You know, if that was the end of your story, people would celebrate you as a great hero. You'd have a great legacy, but you were just getting started. After the Einsatzgruppen trial, you went on to play a key role in the German reparations program to the victims of the Holocaust.
Okay, so I get your hint to put an end to these stories.
Well, we're going to a new set of stories. Can you tell me about that?
Well, it occurred to me before the trial was over that there's a sequence we have to follow in time of war. First, you have to end the war. As mentioned, I got 5 battle stars. I was in every major battle. Secondly, you have to bring to justice those who caused the war and those who committed crimes in the war. That was the Einsatzgruppen and the International Military Tribunal trial, and then there were some other national trials. But what about the victims? When we went to Rome to draw up the new statute of the court, I said to them, and I had no official position, but I was the first speaker. I said, I have come to Rome to speak for those who cannot speak, the victims. What are we doing for the victims? We can't just walk away. So from the very beginning, I was aware of the sequence of the different events. After taking care of the victims, you have to prevent it from happening again. I'm still working on that. But we got a lift from Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, a devout Catholic, who in 1952 made a speech, public speech, in which he said terrible crimes have been committed by us against the Jewish people, and we have an obligation to try to make amends. And it was on that basis that we then went into serious discussion of various Jewish organizations and others to how do you implement that?
Hello.
Hello.
How you doing, Dick?
If that's from me, I just left. Okay. They keep me hopping here. Anyway, so there am I, trying
How
to.
many millions of dollars were ultimately paid to the victims of the Holocaust, or billions?
Where are we now? We got interrupted here.
Oh, you were talking about the German
You asked me about
reparations.
the
I was
compensation
asking
for victims.
a follow-up question.
Yeah.
How many millions or billions of dollars did end up getting paid to the victims?
How many what?
Millions or billions of dollars were paid to the victims.
I didn't understand your question.
So
All right.
then a lot of money ended up getting paid to the victims because of your efforts.
Oh, well,
How much? How much was it?
when I left, it was $50 billion.
Okay. So let me fast forward.
I thought that's enough. I said, that's enough. I'm going home.
We're running short of time, and I want to ask you about some other things. So I'm going to fast forward to your life after the work you did for the reparations. You then devoted many years to the creation of a permanent international criminal court.
Yes.
And a minute ago, you mentioned going to Rome during the negotiations of that court and talking about the victims. And you also mentioned that you gave the opening argument in the very first trial before the International Criminal Court. How did that come about?
Well, I finally got to the trial of the subsequent proceedings, we were called it. So the judicial courts. And I got a call one day from a chief prosecutor, Marino Ocampo of Argentina. He said, Ben, we'd like you to do the open. We'd like us to make the closing argument.
Oh, it was the closing. Okay, the closing argument.
I said, sure. So, and this was the first case by what was created, the International Criminal Court. That when you skipped over that pretty quickly, because that was the next goal. When the International Military Tribunal finished its trial against Goering and company, they all went home. Well, what do you do with the rest of them? And I had my Einsatzgruppen group of boys, murdered a million people, cold blood. You're not going to just go home. And so they decided to have a whole series of judicial trials. And Telford Taylor was appointed by the president to take over where Jackson left off. And so I was working on preparing those cases. And well, now, where did you leave me off there? You left me
Well,
off.
so I was just wondering when the chief prosecutor of the modern International Criminal Court,
Oh, yes, and they came with the
Moreno Ocampo, gave you
Marino Ocampo asked me if I would do it. Well, I said, of course I'll do it. And I went and I repeated the arguments that I had made in the Einsatzgruppen trial. And that's what they wanted me there to call it a crime against humanity.
It showed that your legacy after 70 years was still vital.
Oh, very much
Let me
so.
ask you,
Very much so.
let me ask you about another aspect of this.
The crimes were continuing. Wars were going on. And I had reached the conclusion personally that the only way to stop this is to stop war making.
And that's what I want to ask you about now. So in addition to prosecuting war criminals, you've also spent most of your life advocating for modern international courts to be able to prosecute the crime of waging an aggressive war. You have wanted to make war itself a crime. Why is that so important to you?
That's correct. I have reached the conclusion the only way to stop this type of crime is to stop war making itself. In fact, that it's the stupidest thing we can do is to go to war and to settle our disputes or to try to settle our disputes by the use of armed force. It's the stupidest thing because, first of all, we have the nuclear weapons. We can't use them because we don't know what to do with the waste, and we can't kill all that many people in one shot. Besides, they're obsolete. They're obsolete. We now have cyberspace. Cyberspace, I said, what's that? What does that mean? I was enlightened by an American general who we were both attending a peace conference in St. Petersburg, Russia, and we're the only two Americans there. And I asked him, well, what are you working on now? He said, I'm working on a cyberspace problem. I said, cyberspace problem? What's that? He said, well, now, you know, we have the capacity from cyberspace to cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth. I said, no, I didn't know that. I said, how long will it take everybody to die? Well, he said, I'm not aware of any studies being made yet on that subject, but my guess is it would depend upon how much water they had. If they had enough water, they probably could survive for about a week. I said, a week? And this was all hush-hush. We were meeting, having breakfast in Moscow, in the St. Petersburg hotel. And obviously this was a secret thing. It goes back 10 or 15 years. By now, people have written books and there are conferences about it, so I can talk about it. But that was an eye-opener. Ordinary warfare is obsolete. If you can kill everybody in one shot, wipe out a city. And the American, I said, well, how do you go about doing that? He said, well, you know, I'm on my way now, he says, to China, because they can do it too. And the Russians can also do it too. Wow, wow, eye-opener. So there are many nations today. In the United States, we are the proudest, we are the strongest, we are the best, says the president. Kill everybody. And you're still talking about using armed force? Are you crazy?
You know, Ben, I think a lot of people, you know, would say that you're such an idealist. But I think that it is your idealism and also realism about this issue that keeps people having an honest conversation about the use of force. And thank goodness for you. Let me ask a final question so we can get to the Q&A from the students in the audience. You're 100 years old. You're a living legend. You're literally a rock star.
102 in 5 months.
You're a rock star in the field of international criminal law. Can you give the students some pieces of wisdom that you've gained from all of this experience to end your speech before we go into the Q&A? What would be 1 or 2 pieces of wisdom you'd have for the students?
I think young children, or any children, they're none of them are 102 years old. I'm finished. I'm not worrying about my welfare. I've had it. But you can no longer rely on war as an instrumentality to settle any disputes. And it's prohibited by the UN Charter. Because what we do today, we increase our defense budgets, billions and billions of dollars. We don't have any money left to pay for the students' education or for the care of the aged or for the urgent needs which drives them to take action which we call terrorist. Instead of using it to help the people who are needy with justified complaints, you build more weapons to kill more people. That's stupid. It's just plain stupid. And I don't care what they want to call me as being a crazy or an idealist. That's not being idealistic. That's being, use your common sense. How long can you continue to do that? Are we heading to kill everybody? I don't expect to be around for another 101 years, but I do rely on the young people. And I tell them, never give up. I got 3 pieces of advice. 1, never give up. 2, never give up. 3,
never give up.
Never give up, because it's so stupid what we do now. Then it's almost
Ben, you've made such an impact to the world. Do you feel that students these days can have a significant impact? What can they do?
Well, everybody has something they can do. The assumption that it's too big a problem. If this little guy from Transylvania can do what I have done, why can't you? Just say, no, we won't go. Hell no, we won't go. They started some of that with some of the Vietnam Wars. You know, they say, oh no, we won't go. And McNamara, who was then Secretary of Defense, he joined me in a letter to the editor, the op-ed piece in the New York Times, calling upon the president to sign on to the International Criminal Court. And so the people in highest rank, they should be aware of the fact that we can no longer rely upon the old-fashioned way. If it were just little David throwing a rock at the Goliath and then becoming the king, I would settle for that. But now, even if you don't drop an atomic bomb anymore, that's obsolete. You wipe out the city or you wipe out the country. What the hell are you waiting for? I mean, wake up, wake up. And it's to the young people. And guys like Michael Scharf, we've been working on this for some time together. And it's not easy. And it's very difficult because we have glorified war making for centuries, marching in the parade, the flags are flying. They can't call me a traitor. I got 5 bloody battle stars. There are very few who survive that.
And I will add that you met me when I was the age of the law students out there. You wrote the introduction of my first ever book. That was 20 books ago. And if that can launch me on the career, your words of wisdom, your enthusiasm, your spirit can, I think, inspire many other students. I want to open it up now to the Q&A because people are really eager to ask you questions. I'm going to turn it over to Dean Levy. He's going to serve as the moderator. Thank you, Ben. It's been great talking to you again.
Thank
Dean?
you.
Well, that was really wonderful. Thank you both. We have a few questions, and you can continue to ask questions if you like. We'll get to as many as we can. Here's a question about the trial, the Einsatzgruppen case, and the question is about the judge, Michael Mosmano, and the questioner would like to know, Ben, what was the judge's demeanor? Was he a fair judge, and did he display outrage during the trial, or was he unemotional in his demeanor?
It's an interesting question because during the trial, Mosmano was on the Superior Court of Pennsylvania. He was a kibbutzer. I would like to be a kibbutzer, but not during a mass murder trial. And whatever objection I made to hearsay evidence, thrice removed, objection overruled. He finally got so fed up with me, he said, look, I'm going to admit everything up to and including the sex life of a penguin. Some judge, you know. And but when the time came for sentencing, he went to a monastery, stayed with his priest for a week, and he came back. I forgave him everything, all the kibbutzing. He had been saying to himself, let him talk. Let him talk. They're not going to fool me with all that bullshit. That they weren't there, they didn't see it, and all that. And he came back and he said, first they read the sentences, guilty, 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 guilty. The next day, they gave the sentencing. Out of all note, for the crimes of which you've been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. Next, they step back into the little lift of the elevator, drops them down into hell, but right below the courtroom. The next one, for the crimes of which you've been convicted, this tribunal sentences you death by hanging, death by hanging, death by hanging. I thought my head was going to bust. Then I realized that Mosmano was saying to me in his own way, leave him alone, let him talk. I'm going to have the last word, and they're not going to fool me with any of that. And we got to be very good friends afterwards. During the trial, I held my distance, of course, from the judges. But afterwards, we became good friends. He was a member of the Navy during the war. He was stationed down in Italy, in Milan. And when the trial was over, he gave me an introduction to his girlfriends in Milano. And I went there with my wife once. I was entertained by one of his friends. And when I went out to the men's room, one of the waiters said, well, you know that girl from? I said, she's a friend of a friend of mine. She said, she's a friend of all the friends. all the men in Milan. So we got to know each other. He was a good man, really. And he wrote a book about the trials. He did other books as well.
a very emotional experience for a judge, I would think. Uh, here's a question along the same lines of the emotional aspect of this. You had the experience of visiting some of the death camps at the time of the liberation. How did that experience affect your decision making as you prepared and prosecuted the Eisengruppen case?
That's a very interesting question, really. While I was going into the camps and seeing the horrors, my eyes sort of pretended this was not real. This must be a Hollywood set. And I would not have been able to continue if I just said, yeah, this is a human being. Of course, I realized they were human beings. And that realization came later, years later. The Queen of Holland gave me an Erasmus Prize, and there was this equivalent to the Nobel Prize for Europe. And that question came up. And I said, I've got 5 battle stars for not being killed or wounded in the war. But not all wounds are visible. And in fact, I was so traumatized by what I saw that it never left me, and it never leaves me.
Do you know, did other prosecutors and judges go visit the camps as part of the trial work?
Not to my knowledge. Eisenhower, when he came, he visited Buchenwald, one of the first to go in. But if when you say visit the camps, it did make it sound like an excursion. I was there during the war was still on. And that was my job, get to Buchenwald. Buchenwald, go to Flossenburg. Flossenburg, the front was moving back. You go to Salzburg, you go to this one. And then I had to move quick, get in, get the evidence quick, and get your hell out of there. But they were aware, of course, terrible crimes were committed, but they never had that type of personal contact with seeing it in action.
We have a question about Nazi scientists who received reduced sentences and then ultimately made their way to the United States. And if you have any reflections on that.
Well, when you talk, I take the question to mean that after the war, where the former Nazi scientists were invited to come to the United States or were transported to the United States without invitation, it would have been more interesting because of their knowledge of nuclear warfare and their experience on that. I found it very discouraging because with me, war was not just a matter of one military against another. It was a matter of morality and of humanity. And the German scientists, as they were called, were doing their job for their duty. We didn't indict any, as far as I can recall, for being a scientist and for giving his government the weaponry that they wanted to have. But it also reflects how war making is not a way to settle anything. And we have to change our way of thinking, our hearts and our minds, that every human being has a right to be treated as a human being and not as an object of something you kill or slaughter or an enemy and so on. So this change in heart and mind to reverse something which we have glorified, the opposite, will take some long doing. I hope there will be somebody left, because if they continue this way, they can kill everybody. Goodbye, kids. I say, I'm trying to warn you. changed the way of reacting. We needed a court. We needed a court to settle disputes by peaceful means only. That's what the United Nations Charter called for. And now, this particular time, we finally got the court, and nobody worked harder at getting that court than I did. We have 2 volumes on defining international aggression, 2 volumes on International Criminal Court, 2 volumes on a lot of books on it. And now we are in mortal danger of being able to kill everybody. And how do you deal with that? You just ignore it. I see that as a real danger. Why should this planet be one of a million planets in space where we only find life on this planet? These are serious problems. And I won't live long enough to deal with or solve them. But the new generation must ask themselves, isn't there a better way to settle disputes by peaceful means only? Abolish the use of armed force, as the United Nations Charter hoped after we had killed 50 million people in the Second World War. That was the hope, that we'd be able to develop a system of settling disputes by peaceful means only. And it's not so unreasonable. It's quite unreasonable to do what they're doing now. They're trying to kill the court because they say no American should be even investigated by this court. And we have provisions in the statute now, as there in Rome when we negotiated the statute, that primacy belongs to the nationality of the accused. If they want to try him, they have absolute jurisdiction, and the International Court has no jurisdiction. So that right exists. They say the privacy of our sovereignty or our sovereignty. That is already been taken care of. They're attacking the court with lies, with absolute lies. If you read it, primacy goes to the national jurisdiction after they give them a fair trial, not that they don't whitewash them. And so we have a court now, which is under siege. The president, in a presidential order, directed that if any American is investigated, they have to cut off the bank accounts and passports of any of the judges who are in any way connected with the case. It's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous and suicidal. That's the condition today in the United States. Well, we have an election coming up, and I don't know who's going to win it, but this administration has repudiated everything that Justice Jackson stood for. The International Military Tribunal stood everything as Justice Telford Saylor, who was my law partner in the later years, the trials that he had. And we are defying reason and humanity. And it's a repudiation of Raphael Lemkin as well. And so you have to make up your mind. Do you believe in peaceful settlement of disputes, or you want to take a nice big chance and see that you're not blown to hell? Okay? That's the challenge for your young generation.
That's a nice choice. We have a question here that maybe fits in with what you've just been talking about, which is to ask you whether this court, the International Criminal Court, how effective do you think it is, and how would you compare it to the Nuremberg model?
Well, to answer your question directly, how effective is it? It has not been effective because we still have the wars going on. Michael Scharf, Professor Scharf, he put out a regular weekly list of how many courts there are in different countries of the world where people are still killing people, other people. So it has not been effective, and it's not because it's not trying. But the job is a tremendous job to reverse something which has been glorified for so many centuries. You can't do that so easily. You have to work on it slowly, and you must never give up. Don't forget that. You can't do this overnight. It will take, I don't know if we'll make it, more time, because our capacity to kill is getting so acute, and compared to our capacity to help people, that I don't know who's going to win that race. But surely, if you don't have a way of settling it by law, you have no more instruments left. except to kill the other guy if he kills you. So my slogan here is law, not war. And that's the only there is no other logic to it. And if you're convinced of that, then you have to choose. You prefer war, with what all that means, and you can see it's getting worse all the time, or you want to turn to rule of law and build it up. It has to be built up. It's not going to blossom all of a sudden. But it takes a long time to do that. But where do you put your chips? Where do you put your hopes? And I say, law, not war, is my slogan.
Make law, not war.
Yes.
A new slogan. We have a question about truth and reconciliation commissions and whether you have a view of those commissions as there have been.
I'm always in favor of truth and reconciliation rather than what we do now. You lie and you try to kill the other guy before he kills you. How stupid can you get? Truth and resolution is a good idea, reconciliation. And we can always use that instead of what we, anything is better than the current missions system.
I think we have time for one more, and the question focuses on the fact that both you and Raphael Lemkin were Jewish, and how do you assess the fact that you were Jewish in relation to your experiences following the war?
My personal reaction, I can't speak for Raphael. His whole family was killed because they were Jews. My family fled because they were being persecuted in both Hungary and Romania. But my experience in the camps was always, I always saw them as human beings. I never saw them, even if they had sometimes had a Star of David on their back, but those usually were worn out. And it didn't make any difference to me. I wasn't there to help the Jews and to rescue the Jews. I was there to help helpless people who were being killed and tortured and murdered. And that was my approach to it. Now, I was raised in an Orthodox family. I was a skeptic from early years. My dear wife, who I was happily married to for over 74 years without a quarrel, she died about a year ago. She would say, somebody up there is saving you for a purpose, because I went through so many times and conditions where I could have been killed, and I'm still at it, even at my 101 going on 102.
We can't thank you enough, Mr. Ferencz, and Dean Scharf, for being with us today. We've come to the end of our program. What a privilege for all of us, and I know I speak for the audience, for us to be with you here and to hear about your passionate beliefs and all that you've done. We're so grateful to you for taking the time to share your life story with us. And
I'm grateful to you for calling me.
Well, it's really, it was our privilege and honor, and we thank you so much for all that you've done to promote the rule of law. That is the mission of the Bolch Judicial Institute, and so you are one of our rule of law guardians, and we can't praise you and celebrate you enough for that. And thank you, Dean Scharf, for being such a thoughtful moderator and for your own contributions to the rule of law. And thank you to our audience. You're here today because you also care about preservation and promotion of the rule of law. This has been a program of the Bolch Judicial Institute at Duke Law School. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.